All right, let's get right into it. For more than 300 years, there was this one dynasty that completely shaped South Asia. It left behind some of the most stunning art you'll ever see, a real fusion of cultures, and a political system that was, well, pretty complex. We're talking about the Mughal Empire. But the way we often think about this empire, it's been filtered through centuries of myths and misunderstandings. So, in this explainer, we're going to peel back those layers and get a look at the real story. So here's the big question that used to dominate the conversation, especially in the West. Was the Mughal Empire an Oriental despotism? You know, this idea of a rigid, all-powerful state crushing a totally passive society. But was that really the deal? Was it really that simple? Let's dig in. And this right here, this slide pretty much sets the stage for our whole conversation. On the left, you've got the old myth, a brutal, centralized machine that just sucked the life out of a broken society. But on the right, you see what modern historians are telling us, that the empire was actually more of a loose power structure, that it was surprisingly complex and accommodating, and that the society it ruled over was anything but broken. It was incredibly dynamic.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to tackle that despotism idea head-on. Then we'll rewind to the very beginning and see how this dynasty even got started. From there, we'll get into the brilliant, inclusive model of the Emperor Akbar, check out the empire's golden age of culture, then see how things started to get tricky, and finally, we'll wrap up with a totally reconsidered legacy.
You know, this idea of Oriental despotism wasn't just some casual observation. It was a really powerful theory used to frame Asian empires as fundamentally different from European ones and, frankly, inferior. The Mughals were basically Exhibit A, a state that just took and gave nothing back. But as we're finding out, the real picture is so much more nuanced. So let's see how this whole thing began. Because the empire's start, well, it was anything but grand and secure. It was basically born from the ambition of a prince from Central Asia, and believe me, its early years were incredibly shaky. So the founder, Babur, he wins this huge battle in 1526, but then dies just 4 years later. His son Humayun takes over, but get this, he actually loses the whole kingdom and has to flee into exile for 15 years. He only manages to get his territory back just months before he dies. So it's his young son, Akbar, who inherits this incredibly fragile enterprise in 1556. And what did the founder himself think of his new prize? Well, in his diary, the Baburnama, Babur complains all the time about the heat, the people, the culture, but even he couldn't deny the reality on the ground. He admits it's a huge country with tons of gold and money, and crucially, an unlimited supply of amazing craftsmen. This wasn't some backwater, it was a treasure chest. Okay, so here's the thing you have to understand. It was Akbar who really built the Mughal Empire, and he didn't do it with just brute force. No, he built it by creating this flexible, inclusive, and really pragmatic system. It was designed to rule over this vast and super diverse population, most of whom, by the way, were not Muslim. Now, the backbone of his whole government was something called the Mansabdari system. You can kind of think of it as a ranked nobility, but with a major twist. Your rank, or mansab, wasn't based on who your dad was. It was based on your talent and your service to the emperor. And the land grants, called jagirs, that paid your salary, they weren't supposed to be hereditary. This was a genius move. It kept the entire nobility loyal and dependent on the emperor. And his overall strategy, it was just brilliant. He didn't just conquer people, he brought them into the fold. He made marriage and military alliances with powerful Hindu Rajput kings. He appointed Hindus to the highest positions in government. I mean, his top general and his finance minister were both Hindu. He famously got rid of the jizya, a tax on non-Muslims, and even set up a space for open religious debates between Muslims, Hindus, Christians, you name it. This image you're seeing, it's the entrance to the palace of Raja Man Singh, a powerful Rajput king who is also one of Akbar's most trusted generals. This wasn't just for show. This alliance between the Mughals and the Rajputs was the military and political bedrock of the entire empire for generations. It was absolutely crucial. So what happens when you create that kind of stability? Well, you get an explosion of culture, art, and economic prosperity. This is what totally blows up that old myth of a pulverized society. Instead, what you see is this confident, creative, vibrant civilization at the absolute top of its game. Under Akbar's son, Jahangir, Mughal art just hit a whole new level. I mean, just look at the incredible detail in the tile work at his tomb. It's not just Persian, and it's not just Indian. It's this new, blended Indo-Persian style that's just bursting with color and life. It became the signature look of Mughal culture. And then you get Shah Jahan, the master builder. He's the guy behind the Taj Mahal, of course, but also the incredible Red Fort in Delhi. And that fort wasn't just some military base, it was the symbolic heart of the empire. For centuries, it was the ultimate emblem of power in all of India. And even under the next emperor, Aurangzeb, who often gets painted as this super rigid Puritan, the tradition of building these grand structures continued. This is the massive Badshahi Mosque in Lahore, one of the biggest in the world, and it was built during his reign. The cultural engine of the empire was still firing on all cylinders. Okay, so now we have to talk about Aurangzeb. His really long reign is often seen as the moment everything went wrong, when the empire's tolerant policies got thrown out the window, leading to its eventual decline. But the real story, as you've probably guessed, is way more complex than just a simple tale of religious fanaticism. So, yes, it's true, Aurangzeb did bring back the jizya tax. But the why is what's really interesting. It seems to have been less about pure religious belief and more about cold, hard cash. The empire was under a ton of financial pressure after decades of constant warfare. Reimposing the tax was a way to tap into the growing wealth of the Hindu and Jain merchant classes. It was a pragmatic move. And here is a fact that might just blow your mind. At the very end of Aurangzeb's supposedly intolerant reign, what percentage of the empire's top officials, the Mansabdars, were Hindus? Almost a quarter, 25%. That single number completely dismantles the simple story that he just drove all non-Muslims out of power. So where does all this leave us? Well, the Mughal Empire clearly wasn't some simple top-down despotism. It was a messy, complex political arrangement that was built on negotiation, on alliances, and on finding ways to accommodate a ton of different people. And it was the incubator for a dynamic economy and a vibrant blended culture that was uniquely Indo-Islamic. I want to leave you with this really powerful quote from Aurobindo Ghosh, who was a huge figure in India's independence movement. He called the Mughal Empire a great and magnificent construction and argued it was infinitely more liberal and tolerant in religion than any contemporary European kingdom or empire. Pretty strong words. So the next time you hear that phrase Oriental despotism, maybe take a second and ask, what's the complex reality that this simple stereotype is trying to erase?